So we're going to be talking about grooves. Now, we all see them on the clubs, but what do they actually do? You know, they're on woods, they're on irons, they're on wedges, and we're all told how important they are. But today we're going to give you an insight into, in each bit of the bag, what they do and why it's important to have them and why you should look after them.
Okay, so we're going to start looking at the top end of the bag here, and as you can see from these two woods here, they've both got grooves on them, but why? We understand why irons and wedges have grooves on them, but why would a wood have a groove on it, for example?
This is something that's also varied over the years. There are different depths and different markings and layers of texture and tread on the face, and it's probably, I guess to be fair with woods, it's texture and tread as much as grooves that create an influence. So, driver, to start with that, this has got the least depth of pattern on it, but this is also a club that's not really hit off the ground. So that interaction with the ground and the moisture and the dirt and things that you can bring up into the contact area by hitting the ground is less of an issue with the driver because it's on a tee. Also
trying to maximise ball speed as well, would you say? So elements of spin to a certain extent. Obviously nowhere near as many grooves as what you see in an iron and a wedge, they're nowhere near as aggressive. The fairway wood that I've got here, you can see has got grooves in it, and I know these have recently been brought back onto fairway woods. What would be the reason for that, do you think?
Well, I think, well, driver, because it's up in the air, you're able to clean your ball before hitting it, you're starting with as pure a surface as possible. So without any texture, essentially the texture and the grooves and the tread are to get moisture away from the contact point. Now this is actually true across every single club in the bag. With the driver, it's travelling the quickest, and the more you can bead that water off the middle part of the head as it's accelerating through, the better the less interference on the contact with the ball you're going to get. Now, whilst it won't affect ball speed, you don't want that ball kind of wobbling around and falling out of the sky. So the less between the face and the ball, the better. Hence the shallowest tread on the driver. But you've also got the thinnest face on the driver. So you can't really put much of a groove into it without creating a weakness.
And on the fairway wood here, you can see there are some grooves, and I think part of these are partly visual as much as anything else, in terms of, as you can see on this particular model, they've been coloured in white, and that actually gives me the impression of a little bit more loft on the wood as well. So they're being used for a slightly different reason here as well as actually the purpose of the groove itself. It's actually giving me the impression of, or demonstrating to me when I put the club down behind the ball, it's showing me the loft on the golf club as well, which I think with fairway woods is quite important nowadays with the black faces and the multi-materials that they're using.
Yeah, I mean, it's the irony between when people complain that the woods were different colours, or white or red or blue, and they're all distracting, and then the brands went to make them black again and people say, oh, I can't see the face. So actually, with the lack of the differentiation of crown and the face, as Nick says, you can see the loft much more clearly. The other bit, I mean, one of the anecdotes we can give you about grooves is we've worked with a number of tour pros over the years, but Tony Johnson in particular always used to bemoan not having grooves on his fairway woods. When they went away, so the problem was that the water just sits on the face. If you get a fairway with a bit of dew on or a bit of moisture if it's been raining, as you come into the back of the ball, you pick up some of that moisture as you're coming into contact. If you get deep into the ground and you sort of sweep across the top of the grass, you're going to lift some of that moisture, it's going to get up the face. So without a groove, it's got nowhere to go. And then it gets between the ball and the face, and the ball squirrels away and goes sideways, or can do. So Tony always used to pick the paint out of the grooves. He said, if you're going to have a groove, have it as deep as possible to get as much dirt and moisture away from the contact point. He said, I want all of that groove depth. He said, now, he wasn't that fussed about seeing the loft, but he would get a sharp object and just pick the paint out. A little bit of acetone just to melt the paint down as well, because he wanted as much displacement of moisture and dirt as possible. But that's why we're seeing grooves back on fairway woods again, and hybrids in particular.
Fantastic, absolutely brilliant.
So that's the wood end, the hollow body, the hybrid fairway wood driver end of the bag. Now we come on to irons. So much more of an obvious reason with irons why you'd have the grooves, or rather we're more used to seeing grooves on iron heads. And we've got a couple of different types on show here. So you can see wider grooves on this head, narrow grooves on this one. So same reasons for displacing moisture and dirt away from the face and ball contact. like other videos, we'll keep coming back to certain principles, and this is a really key one. I mean, you were saying there's a great story about Sir Justin Thomas and the way he practices, but the pros are militant about digging dirt out the grooves, and for what reason?
Yeah, to create more spin and therefore consistency of flight in terms of what they're seeing from a launch and spin perspective. So Justin Thomas, I've seen videos of him. He has a little brush on attached to his belt, and in between wedge shots, he'll brush off the debris from the divot he's just taken, because he's working with a TrackMan and he's trying to dial in his distances. And obviously these guys are trying to be as pinpoint as they possibly can. Now, I've seen plenty of clients come into the bay who have had golf clubs where they've been caped in mud, and therefore they might be struggling to create spin, especially at the bottom end with their wedges. So definitely, I think in terms of making sure that the full depth of the groove is clear is big for spin retention as well, and consistency of flying.
Yeah, and I think a lot of players might say, "Oh, am I good enough to see a difference from that?" But ultimately, all you're doing is you're clogging up a key part of the performance of the clubs. If you're leaving the grooves filled with dirt, then they can't do the job they're designed for, and they're on the clubs because they do a really good job. So maybe you don't have to go to quite the same lengths as the pros on it, but once you've played a shot, make sure you clean them out, get that depth of groove there to get the dirt and the moisture and the mud into that gets the ball contacting the face. Now, the two different types of grooves here. Now, we've seen these on some of the tour models heads in the past, variations that we wouldn't get at retail, but the two styles of head here, the wider grooves and the narrow grooves, they serve slightly different purposes.
Yeah, the first time I came across this sort of configuration of grooves was actually a Callaway model many years back that Phil Mickelson was playing personally, and he wanted more grooves on the face because it helped him get away from any flies in the rough, so he could retain spin, which he felt was vitally important. So the Apex model that came, the X-Forge model, I should say, that came to market, had lots of grooves comparatively to anything else in the market at that point in time. And I think you can see between the two models that we've got here, more game improvement, so a little bit of bit of sparsity between the grooves here compared to this model, which is technically the next model up in their range. More grooves, more control is kind of what they're looking to gain here.
Yeah. And that's where, again, Callaway again have had the different models on a more different grooves on the same model in recent years, where in the US the players have gone for the wider spacing on the grooves because they want the ball to come out of the rough hot, and in Europe where we get more rain, well, we don't necessarily get more rain, but conditions are a little more variable, the European Tour players or DP World Tour players wanted the extra grooves to get that extra bit of control and to make sure they didn't get the flies out of the rough. So even at the top end, that for them the minutiae of the different groove styles means better performance or different performance in certain situations that they would prefer given one set of circumstances to the other. So then we come on to wedges. Now this is where there's the most talk about things like bounce, grooves, the kind of the detailed tech on the heads, but the grooves have more differences in the way they're constructed in wedges.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, similar story. In the past, we have, when the groove change first came to market, some of the manufacturers did put more grooves onto the face whilst we were trying to figure out a way to get around the groove rule and create more spin again. Eventually, it was more sort of tread and traction, wasn't it?
What was that groove rule change? I think just to remind everyone how it actually...
It was in regards to the shape and the depth of the grooves that you could have on the wedge, which came into play a few years back now. And actually, I think it was this year, wasn't it? That actually now those golf clubs with those old grooves are non-conforming, so you can't play those in tournament play anymore, just in case there's anybody out there who've got those. But the first edition that the manufacturers brought out after that was a lot of grooves on the face to try and up the spin back to where it was pre that decision being made. Now we've found other ways in terms of the milling and the tread on the wedge faces to give us that spin retention back, and I think we're probably back to where we were pre the rule coming into play, I would say.
So in the wedges, there is also different types of grooves, different widths, different depths, different shapes as you change loft. So in the low loft wedges, the grooves are actually narrower and deeper. That's to get the dirt away from the face, a little bit more displacement of dirt, but the actual kind of the spin effect of the wider and shallower groove on the higher loft wedge gives a bit more surface area to get a bit more grip. It actually bites into the cover a little bit more at low speed, creates, ironically, the shallower groove helps them create a little bit more spin. Now there is a limit on the actual dimensions and the volume of those grooves, which is why they've got to use depth and width. So they are quite limited. But then we also get slightly different tread and milling between the grooves and directions of milling as you change loft as well. So more linear across the face on the low lofts because you're not really opening the face up. But as you go up in loft and players will start to open the wedge faces up and cut across the ball a bit more, then some of the milling will become more diagonal across the face. Now, Vokey don't do it, but certainly TaylorMade do, certainly Callaway do, certainly Strixon do. Cleveland, who are owned by Strixon. They change the direction of the pattern of the milling because as you open the face up, we want the direction of milling here because you're wearing the balls running up the face that way rather than straight up. So each of the brands will do it slightly differently, but dependent on the speed of the swing and the type of shot hit, there is a development of the grooves and the milling and the pattern of the depth of it to optimize spin and control as you're moving down the club head speed and closer to the green. I mean, the other aspect of grooves is groove condition. Something we see a lot of variables with when they come into the bays. Now, we haven't got anything really tired with no grooves on the face, but we do have quite an experienced wedge here. So one of the things to look for in particular when grooves become ineffective, you'll start to see, like we can see here, there's very little visual of that tread, of the milling on the face. So what's happened is we've lost those fine little lines in between the grooves, which actually really do contribute to getting some of the grip. And the other bit is what would you be looking for in terms of the actual groove itself to kind of mark out when it's starting to need changing?
It would be the shaping of it, you know. So these clubs, obviously, you're hitting them in debris, bunkers, rough. Hopefully nothing any worse than that, but cart paths from time to time.
There's a little mark on the front of that that might say something else.
But eventually that's going to change the shape of the groove as well, which is going to change the performance of it. So I think whenever anybody brings in an old wedge and we're talking about updating into a new wedge, if I'm seeing anything funky going on with the numbers from the TrackMan in terms of spin, the first thing I'm going to do is start investigating the grooves, the shape of them, to make sure they're not misshapen in any particular way. If they are, then you're definitely going to see a drop off because the sharper edges of the grooves are going to be disturbed, and therefore you're not going to get the same traction onto the golf ball.
Yeah, I think a good way of judging it would be, you know, the grooves at the top of the face are the ones that aren't used as much. So those are generally the ones that stay pretty fresh and pretty sharp. So if you study the shape and the sharpness and the cleanliness of the edges there, down the bottom, the top groove is going to start to round off quicker. So you lose that kind of sharp edge to it. So if you see the top edge of the groove rounding off and losing, almost basically smoothing out the surface between the grooves, that is when you're going to start to lose critical performance in terms of spin, flight control. You know, it's not going to, the club face isn't going to grip the ball the same way. So you should also notice that ball flight popping up a little bit more, higher launch, where you might have seen a particular flight window before, the ball just wants to flare up in the air. And then the key thing there is, you know, eyeball your wedge and look at how round the top edge of the groove is and how does the shape compare top to bottom. And if there's a noticeable differential, it's probably a good time to look at changing.
Absolutely.
So grooves on clubs, wedges through the driver, they're not just there for visuals, that is part of the function of them, but they do a really critical job in terms of maintaining consistency of performance across the bag. So look after them, clean them out, get a tee into them and get the debris out. You know, give your clubs a clean. That's always you see every tour caddy out there being fastidious with how they clean their clubs because it's critical to consistency of performance. So hopefully that's given a good explanation as to what they do at different bits of the bag. It helps you understand why it's important to look after them and make sure you get that tee into them, clear the dirt and the moisture and the grass and mud out of them before you play each shot. So hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you like, subscribe, hit the bell button, give us any comments, let us know what you want to do. It's all great feedback. And the more we hear from you, the more we can do to give you interesting and hopefully informative content moving forward. So thank you for watching. See you soon.